Have you ever stood still, really still, and just looked? Perhaps at a shaft of sunlight filtering through the trees, the way a bird perches lightly on a fence, or the intricate lines of your own hand. Welcome to Wednesday Wandering with me, Cate Field. Wandering about stuff and not just wandering off. So often we rush past the world distracted by deadlines, scrolling screens or just our own thoughts. Yet there is something profoundly beautiful about simply noticing. Taking in the small details of life is an act of creativity and devotion, and a few poets understood this. Fewer better than Mary Oliver. So Mary Oliver was a poet of deep attention. She spent her life wandering forests, walking on the shoreline, and like me, observing the world with an open heart. And her poetry invites us to pay attention, not to the grand, dramatic moments, but to the small, everyday wonders that often go unnoticed. She wrote, "Attention is the beginning of devotion." And in her poetry, she reminds us that looking closely at the world around us is not just an artistic practice, but a way of truly living. And one of her most beloved poems, Wild Geese, which is a favourite of mine, is an anthem of belonging and self-acceptance. And it begins with these words: "You do not have to be good. You do not have to walk on your knees for 100 miles through the desert, repenting. You only have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves." How powerful is that? She is not asking us to strive or prove our worth, just to be. Now, I read an article in the New York Times by Rachel Syme, and it was about Mary Oliver, and it just stuck with me. I think it was about 2019. She described Mary Oliver as a poet who had greatest hits. And so Wild Geese and The Summer Day were recited at weddings and funerals all the time. They were printed out and taped to refrigerators and quoted on social media. And yet, despite her immense popularity, Mary Oliver was often dismissed by critics for being too accessible. And Rachel Syme argues that Oliver's clarity was her strength, and I agree with that. She wrote poetry that people could tune into in times of joy and in sorrow, and poetry that felt like companions. She wasn't interested in making poetry difficult. She was interested in making it meaningful. Oliver's life was one of simplicity and solitude. She lived in Massachusetts for most of her life, spending hours walking and observing. And her poets often feature animals, bears and fish and dogs, not distant subjects, but as kindred spirits. She saw herself as part of the animal world, not separate from it. She was deeply aware of the interconnectedness between human life and nature. Her poem, The Fish, for instance, reflects on eating the first fish she ever caught, possibly in her childhood in Maple Heights, Ohio. She writes, "I am the fish glitters in me. We are risen, tangled together, certain to fall back to the sea." This perspective goes beyond a simple admiration for nature, doesn't it? Oliver saw her place within it, recognising that human existence is just as fleeting and woven into the same cycle of life and death. Mary Oliver had this challenging early life. She rarely discussed it, but she'd survived childhood trauma and abuse, and she did reveal that in an interview with Maria Shriver in 2011. She said, "I was very little, but I had recurring nightmares. There's damage." But Oliver's response to suffering was not bitterness, it was wonder. She devoted her life to finding grace in the ordinary. And in her poem, When Death Comes, she wrote, "I want to say all my life I was a bride married to amazement." Critics often dismissed her work as simplistic, with one New York Times reviewer saying, no animals appear to have been harmed in the making of it. How rude! How rude is that? Others implied that poetry should be intellectually complex rather than emotionally resonant. Rubbish, isn't it? Oliver was uninterested in their judgments. She simply wrote for the people. She wrote for us, people who needed her words. And this is just one of the reasons why I love her work. In an NPR interview, she said, poetry mustn't be fancy. I always feel that whatever isn't necessary should not be in the poem. And that philosophy made her beloved by everyday readers, though it really did frustrate the literary elite. But we don't care about them, do we? Her poetry became part of daily rituals. Blogs were dedicated to reading her work as part of a mindful practice, and her lines were spoken at communal gatherings, like I said before, at funerals and weddings. She believed poetry was meant to be shared, and saying in an interview with Krista Tippett in 2015 that poetry wishes for a community. And one of the most profound themes of that interview was Oliver's belief that paying attention is the foundation of both poetry and a meaningful life. Attention is the beginning of devotion. She explained that noticing the world, especially nature, was not just an artistic practice, but for her a spiritual one. She described walking as a daily ritual during which she would observe the natural world with a deep reverence and curiosity. And this is part of my practice too, that connection between nature and creativity. Mary Oliver teaches us that creativity is not a separate mystical force. It's woven into the natural rhythms of the world. And when we observe nature, we tap into that endless source of artistic inspiration. The movement of the clouds, the symmetry of the leaf, the way the water ripples. These small details hold patterns, emotions and stories that can shape our creative work. Oliver herself followed in the tradition of the Romantics, who saw nature as both teacher and muse. So like William Wordsworth, for example, who believed that poetry should be a spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings arising from deep reflection. And Mary Oliver urges us to look closely, to wait patiently, and to allow beauty to reveal itself. So why does this matter? Well, I think that Mary Oliver's poetry teaches us that inspiration is not just found in the extraordinary, it's found in the ordinary. And I really believe this is absolutely part of my own artistic practice, pausing to notice something. Pause every day. A leaf, the sound of the kettle, the light streaming in through the window. And we write and create to those observations. We accept that creativity and joy are not things that we earn, but things we can simply step into, like sunlight. In her poem, The Summer Day, tell me what it is you plan to do with your one wild and precious life. It's a question worth sitting with, isn't it? Not in a pressured way, but in a gentle, open-hearted way. What will you notice? What will you create? What will you allow yourself to love? So I invite you, after this podcast, to take a walk or sit by the window, simply look around the space you're in right now and notice one small, beautiful thing. Because as Mary Oliver reminds us, the world offers itself to your imagination over and over again. To help you cultivate this habit of deep noticing, I have created a free workbook filled with simple prompts and creative exercises to sharpen your awareness of everyday beauty. So whether you're a writer, an artist, or someone who wants to experience life more fully, this workbook was designed to help you slow down and see the world with fresh eyes. And you can download it via the link in the description. In next week's episode, I'll be exploring and wondering about slow living and how this can help cultivate creativity, and I really hope you can join me. Thank you so much for listening to me today, and I hope you've taken a little something of Mary Oliver's wonder with you. Bye-bye.